Carving out a unique niche in the literary landscape, Lemony Snicket has captivated audiences with tales of calamity that blend dark humor, incisive observation, and a narrative voice that is as distinctive as it is compelling. And lurking behind the pen name is the imaginative force of Daniel Handler.
In some ways, I never thought of it as a pen name. Mostly what I thought was, wouldn't it be fun to just publish them under the name of the narrator and to keep the mystery and atmosphere of the stories intact?
Stepping out from behind the guise of Lemony Snicket, Handler's newest book, And Then, What Else? Narrates his own life growing up in San Francisco in, of course, an unexpected way.
Every so often, someone would say to me, do you want to write a memoir? And I would picture a book where it's chapter 1, I am born, chapter 187, what I had for lunch yesterday, and there's like a stripe of photographs in the middle of the book that everyone skips to, and that was not a kind of book that was interesting to me. I came into it writing about just literature that was important to me, and I realized that in order to talk about how I loved it, I had to talk about what was going on with me when I was reading it. And so I think for me it was a little sneaky way that if someone said, do you want to put your big secret on paper, I would have said no. But if they said, do you want to talk about a Russian-American novelist, but Ben, you're going to have to explain what happened to you, I said, okay, I can do that.
As a man of many talents, Handler has also penned several other books, written a stage play, and worked in film and television. And his artistic repertoire even extends to playing the accordion.
A lot of the music that I've done has been in the company of Stephen Merritt, who's a fantastic songwriter. He leads a band called the Magnetic Fields. But just to get to play a little bit of instruments and get in on that was really a pleasure. And similarly with film and TV, to go into a television studio or a film studio and have all these people running around making a set and doing costumes and setting the lights and things like that, that's just an adventure. And I don't like to turn down adventure.
We'd like to welcome today to our author series Daniel Handler, a.k.a. Lemony Snicket, and he's here to talk about his brand new book, And Then, What Else? Thank you very much for joining us today.
I'm happy to be here.
You and I are about the same age. We were born in the same year, 1970, and so I say that because I didn't read as a child your books, the Lemony Snicket books.
I also did not read my books as a child.
Did the Lemony Snicket books in the series, did that pull from your childhood? Were you thinking about it forever, or did you just kind of create that when you became an adult?
To a certain extent it did. I was raised as a Jew, and my family, my extended family fled Germany in 1939, and those are the stories that I grew up hearing as a child about the people who made it, the people who didn't make it, and kind of just the random luck of how you get out alive in such a situation like that, and that there was really no clear rhyme or reason as to why some people were sitting at that table with me talking and laughing and why some people were long gone. And I think that ethic of moving through the world when trouble can happen to you at any time was something that I absorbed. So not quite the exact story, but I think kind of the ethic and philosophy of the work that I do was baked into me pretty young.
Were you raised in a religious house, or was it just a secular
No,
Jewish?
I mean, not very religious, but definitely a big cultural identity. My father's family was very well integrated into Germany, and so they didn't feel like outsiders until what started to happen. And then I think they started to carry that with them.
These set of stories that you came up with, that you created out of your own mind and experiences and imagination, did you see it going on as long as it actually has gone on?
No, I assumed it would be kind of dismal failures. I mean, you don't kind of pitch an idea of terrible things happening to orphans over and over again and think, oh, this is surely going to be my life's work. The very first event I did for when the first book came out, I was in Lansing, Michigan, and I was in a huge chain bookstore. They'd set up enough chairs for everyone in Lansing, Michigan to come hear me. And 2 people showed up. They were adults. I was confused by that, but I went with it. And then they came up and they said, we are from the rival chain bookstore, and we hate your books. We find them really disturbing, and we just had to see kind of what lunatic was responsible.
Wow.
I thought, this is how I thought this would go. And then it did kind of take an upswing there after that. But it's been really surprising what has happened. And part of the kind of continuous bewilderment of realizing this has happened to me was part of the impetus for writing about my own kind of confusing and surprising time.
I went to friends who were around my age, and you and I were born in the same year,
Yeah.
to ask if their children were as taken by these books as they were. And I asked the parents who might have actually had to have read those books to their kids or to their much younger kids. And the only question that came up more than once was, do you like children? And some of these people are Jewish as well, so they've heard these stories like, why do you hate children? These aren't happy, lovely stories where kids are just running around chasing balloons.
No, they're pretty spooky and sad. But that was always the kind of story that I liked. And there's a long tradition of orphans in children's literature, I think, because the idea of being young and by yourself is kind of a magical thing to explore. I think especially if you're not by yourself when you're a child. I think if you're somewhere relatively stable, you begin to think, well, what if this world fell apart? And what if I were really by myself, and finding that? But then I've also heard from so many children who have lost one or more parent. I've heard from so many young people who've been in more realistic but just as desperate situations. And I think the book's not sugarcoating the wickedness of the world, I think is reassuring to a certain person who begins to get suspicious of the kind of smiley education that you're often given as a child in one way or another.
I think we're part of the Sesame Street generation.
Yeah.
Meaning, Sesame Street, I think, came out in late '69. And if you look at early versions of Sesame Street, and I bring this up because it's children's programming and your book is for young adults, those early years, that early decade and a half of Sesame Street was not Elmo. This was not bright, shiny stuff. You have Oscar the Grouch, who's a guy who may have been homeless, who lived in a trash can.
Yeah.
Do you think that sort of era of children's television or children's programming, more realistic and less happy, shiny sort of stuff, had any influence on you as well?
Maybe. I mean, I watched Sesame Street, and that was definitely, I grew up in San Francisco, which is a city with its fair share of visible social failure, I would say. I think more that for me, the public library became a place where I was really seeing kind of all kinds of types of people in the world. The San Francisco Public Library System was the first to have a full-time social worker there, and it was because of so many people in San Francisco were gathering who were homeless or in other kind of states of desperation there. And I would go there, of course, as a nice boy getting books, but I would see how public access to literature was part of a mission of kind of helping people in general. My mother worked in public education, and I just think very early on I had the sense that I was in a very privileged and sheltered life in many ways, but that I saw that there was so much out there that was going on that was quite different from where I was. So I think I got that more directly than I did from Sesame Street. But I definitely watched Sesame Street.
Okay. I want to make sure that we talk about the fact that this book is not a Lemony Snicket book. This is not a continuation of the story. This is you writing underneath yourself. You don't hide very much. You talk about growing up, what it was like in San Francisco, your struggles in college, your struggles with mental health and all those different things. Why did you think writing a book like this under your own name was a thing you chose to do?
Well, I didn't for a long time. Every so often someone would say to me, do you want to write a memoir? And I would picture a book where it's chapter 1, I am born, chapter 187, what I had for lunch yesterday, and there's like a stripe of photographs in the middle of the book that everyone skips to. And that was not a kind of book that was interesting to me. And then I was asked to write an introduction to a new translation of the work of Charles Baudelaire, who's a wacky French poet of ages gone by, and Baudelaire is the name of the heroes in a series of unfortunate events. And so that's why they asked me. And I started to write that introduction by talking about an experience in the library that when I was 12 in 1982, when we were both 12, I went to the library and I saw a book that was called The Flowers of Evil. And as a 12-year-old boy, I was like, that sounds great. They're attacking people or something. I am all in. I don't like flowers. I like evil. Let's read this book. And I took it home, and it was a bunch of strange French poetry about staying up too late in Paris, wandering around lonely and drinking alcohol and consorting with loose men and women. And I found it kind of terrifying and unnerving. I returned it to the library, but then I kept going back and reading it, and I was kind of introduced to a flavor of literature that was strange and wondrous, and it called to me. And I started writing about that, and then I had to call the publisher and say, I think I'm writing a book about how being interested in this kind of literature reflected my own life and my own background, and how it carried me through on this journey through strange literature. And they said, hesitantly, okay, well, are you still going to write that introduction? And I said, yes, I will. And then I also wrote this book. And so many things that I felt, as you mentioned, for many years I felt not ready to talk about, certainly publicly. There's some things in here that only the people very closest to me knew before this. So even the book has just been published, and I'm hearing from people I know who are saying, holy crap, or more colorful versions of that we don't say on TV. I didn't know this about you, people who've known me for years. But I felt in being able to talk about reading and writing, which is so important to me and so passionate to me, that it left some space to talk about things in my life that I had not discussed before.
Was it your mental health struggle, or
yeah,
other
I mean,
things?
even that feels like a kind of euphemistic way for what happened to me when I was in college. I started having a sleep disorder. I was having really terrible nightmares, and then I began to have seizures and hallucinations. And when I was 22, I had an enormous seizure, and when I woke up, I couldn't read or write or speak for quite a few months. It was terrifying to me. And that I continue, in some ways it's calmed down a lot, but I continue to have the occasional seizure, and I still hallucinate quite a lot. And it was something, it's very hard to tell people that, because you sound, of course, like a complete lunatic, and people don't know what to say in a conversation. You can't say like, I'm sorry, I'm distracted. I'm seeing something over there that no one else can see but me. And so I didn't talk about it. I learned to kind of live with it in a way that only people who were really, really intimate with me knew about this. But I also began to see that kind of thing is something that happens more frequently than you might think. And it began to feel a little bit like something unspoken that ought to be public rather than something that was killing conversation. And so, yeah, I would say that's kind of the biggest personal revelation in the book, is that is happening. And just on this tour so far, I've already met people who have said, I heard that this was in this book. This is something that's happened to me, or this is something that's happened to someone I love. And there's kind of no vocabulary for it in public conversation. So I already feel good that I'm telling that story. It feels like a good thing to do.
When did you start writing this book?
I started writing this book in COVID.
It could be a COVID project.
I think that's why the publisher said, okay, it's fine, you're making a book. We don't know what's happening. The whole world's going away, maybe.
Some people make banana bread. You made a book.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of banana bread in my house, but I couldn't take any more. Even with chocolate chips, after a certain state, you can't take any more banana bread. And so, yeah, I was writing about it, and I came into it writing about just literature that was important to me, and I started talking about a novel by Vladimir Nabokov that I loved, and I realized that in order to talk about how I loved it, I had to talk about what was going on with me when I was reading it, and then I kind of took a breath and said, okay, well, now you have found your way in. And so I think for me, it was a little sneaky way that if someone said, do you want to put your big secret on paper? I would have said no. But if they said, do you want to talk about a Russian-American novelist, but Ben, you're going to have to explain what happened to you? I said, okay, I can do that. So that's how it came about.
And because you work in so many different mediums, you work in music, you've worked in TV, and you've worked in film, and your works have been
Well, I don't have
involved in
another
those.
job. That's the thing. I guess I'm attracted to them because for me, to be near someone who is doing something well is its own reward. And so a lot of the music that I've done has been in the company of Stephen Merritt, who's a fantastic songwriter. He leads a band called the Magnetic Fields. He records all of his own records. He can play countless instruments. And I met him when I was living in New York, and he asked me to participate in some of his musical projects. And just to watch that happen was fascinating. Like if I didn't get to do anything, but I just got to sit in the room, that would be good. But just to get to play a little bit of instruments and get in on that was really a pleasure. And similarly with film and TV, most of my professional life, I'm writing by myself. And to go into a television studio or a film studio and have all these people running around, making a set and doing costumes and setting the lights and things like that, that's just an adventure. And I don't like to turn down adventure.
Some people would, though. I mean, I do stuff in TV, I do things in radio, and I've done things in totally different mediums as well. It's not frequent that people bounce around between different mediums. And I know each one has its challenge, and sometimes those people don't want to let other people in. You even write about that, talking about your film experience.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think if you come from a literary sensibility, you're going to have some inherent conflict with the world of film and television. If you decide, and then they walk into a castle in a book, that doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't cost the publisher anything. And so, in TV, there's a term that I'd never heard before called the hero set. Like most TV shows have like the one place or a couple of places, the apartment or the coffee house or the police station where everything is going on. And I was saying, oh, well, these orphans actually go to a new location every couple of episodes and we never see it again. So let's build all that in a bunch of warehouses in Vancouver. And they were saying like, well, that's a whole lot of money. And I was like, well, it's not my money. It's not really your money. Let's just have an adventure. And that was sometimes a conflict, yes.
So how did you deal with that conflict? Do you think that they changed the story? Because you mentioned in the book that you don't like to think of your stories or your books as your children, but they're still you could feel that they are messing with the essence of what it is that you're trying to tell.
Yeah, I mean, it's a collaboration. And in a collaboration, you're going to have argument, and sometimes you're going to feel like you came out okay in that argument, and sometimes you're not. So, like, how did I deal with it? Sometimes I had to lay on the floor and listen to sad music. I would try to get my child to make me a martini sometimes to make me feel better.
That's interesting.
Yeah. When you start with the level of investment that happens in TV and film, they're really nervous about it. I mean, another friend of mine who's a writer who works in movies said that he thinks of it as like a duffel bag filled with the budget of the movie. And if someone said, here's $200 million in this duffel bag, I need you to walk it across town. Like, you wouldn't stop for lunch. You wouldn't be like, let's make this walk as beautiful as it can be. You would be terrified the whole time. And they're often terrified because it costs so much money. And I think that's kind of really what the argument ends up being about. And oftentimes if they say like, oh, we don't think this scene is really dynamic, I would say to myself, oh yeah, it's on top of a mountain. They're counting the dollars spent on making it look like the top of a mountain. So yeah, it can be tough to argue with people. But I've had when I was starting out, I had real jobs, and now I've done this, and this is easier. Real jobs are harder.
What do you mean real jobs?
Like where you have to go to an office and you have to do a thing, and you're young, and so the person telling you to do the thing is not asking your opinion about that thing, even though when you're young, of course, you know everything, and you're so smart, and everyone should listen to you all the time, and nobody does. That's a bummer, I think.
Well, you even write in certain terms about that with your writing, your early writing that you did in college and having to write and rewrite and do all these assignments by teachers. Do you think if you had not taken that particular route, going to university and learning the craft in that way, that you would have been a writer anyway?
I wanted to be a writer from a very young age. My parents always told a story that when I was little, someone asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and then I said I wanted to be a wise old man who lived at the top of a mountain giving advice. Yoda. And I don't know if that story's true.
Yoda. You wanted to be Yoda.
Is Yoda a man?
I don't know what Yoda is.
I don't know. We'll talk about that later. But that's for a different episode. But if that story is true, that's the only other thing I wanted to be. But what I remember is that I always wanted to be a writer. When I was young, I went to some programs that were held at the San Francisco Public Library where an author would speak, a children's author, and I always wanted to talk to them as a colleague. I have a warm memory of children's author Marilyn Sachs being super patient with me and treating me like I was a writer, because I said I'm a writer too, and she said, well, let's sit down and talk about our work and how we do it. And that was really important to me. And so I think I would have tried to be a writer no matter what happened to me, but I certainly never thought I would get to do it for a living. My family was supportive of me, but they helped me see that the chances of getting to write for a living were just about nil. And so I've been grateful for the lightning which has struck me.
Do you think they understood it? The desire to want to be a writer. They're supporting, which is
I mean, they were big readers, my parents, and I think they understood the pleasures of literature, and but I think they were a little panicked. I think they thought maybe we encouraged a little too much reading in our household. Maybe we should have taught him how to change a tire.
So what led you to write under a pen name for this huge series, other than, yes, it was successful and people kept buying it? And do you find an advantage or disadvantage of having to write or being able to write under a pen name?
It feels like an advantage to me. I mean, in some ways, I never thought of it as a pen name because Lemony Snicket is a lonely person who narrates these stories about terrible things happening to children. And I think mostly what I thought was, wouldn't it be fun to just publish them under the name of the narrator? And to keep the kind of mystery and atmosphere of the stories intact. But yeah, I think it's been really, really lucky for me because I think it's tough often to be a visible person in the culture. Working in film and television, I've met a lot of people who have some level of fame or other, and I think it's tough to keep that balance. You often attract terrible people to you, and I've had much less of that, partially because in the world of literature, it's not the most glamorous area of fame, but also because no one really knows my name that much, and I like being able to, give my credit card someplace or pick up my pharmacy order and not feel all eyes upon me. It's been really a blessing.
Do you have a credit card that says Lemony Snicket or?
No.
Okay.
No. I don't really have credit cards in any other name. I don't know if that's.
That was an entrapment question. I was trying to get into that.
No, I don't. I confine myself to my own wallet rather than taking others.
Okay.
That's just
good to know.
That's how I go through life.
But does your process change when you're writing as Lemony Snicket and you're putting out work underneath your own name?
Well, I think those books are different. There's a world of Lemony Snicket that is kind of its own atmosphere. But my process isn't the same. My process is still sitting around scrawling sentences on a legal pad and trying to make them better. That's kind of what I do most of the day. That's my job.
And you shuffle sentences around.
I do. I shuffle sentences around. I put my notes on index cards and move them around on the dining room table, leading often to a lively discussion with my wife about what the dining room table is for. Is it for dining? Or is it for moving index cards around on a table? That's just one of the issues in my marriage.
Is that the next book?
All about arguments I've had with my wife?
Yes.
Yeah, she's really hoping for that book.
Yeah, I'm sure.
She's like, this is gold every time we're arguing. She says, why aren't you writing this down? Why isn't this between book covers so everyone can have an opinion on it?
It seems like you always seem to have a font of stories that are ready to come out.
I mean, again, I don't have a job, so I have a lot of contemplation time. I swim in the San Francisco Bay most mornings when I'm home. I like to take a long walk. I have a lot of stories that come into me. I eavesdrop a lot. I take a lot of notes. So I don't lack for ideas because no one's making me go to an office and answer the phone, which I really appreciate.
Again, you've worked in music, you've worked in film. These are different, not just genres, but ways in working. And you write a couple of chapters about music and how it's influenced you, and Prince as well.
Oh, Prince. I mean, we don't have enough interview time to discuss how I feel about Prince.
I'm a Prince fan, so we have plenty of time.
I miss him so much.
Why do you miss Prince, and what attracted you to Prince? We can talk all we want about it.
I mean, in early adolescence, the first Prince album that I was aware of was Dirty Mind. I had a friend who had a cassette copy. Maybe we can do a sidebar sometime to explain to your audience what a cassette is. And he would put it on and we would listen to it, and I would look at the cassette, and he looked so strange and so unnerving. I think it wasn't unlike reading Baudelaire in a certain way. It seemed too adult for me. He was mostly naked on the cover of Dirty Mind, and that's you don't see a man doing that in rock and roll very much. That's usually they'll put a half-dressed woman on the cover of their record, so the four hairy guys who are making the album will not tell you, and so that was unnerving to me, but also attractive. And I think the music was the same when I was young. He seemed a little scary when I was young. There was something about him where he was reminding you that you have a dirty mind as well as he having a dirty mind. And then as I grew older and less unnerved and more attracted by, slinky sexuality, he just became, it was always a party when it was going on. And I think also that he was always so strange, that he was always absolutely following his own thing. So even when it was bad, and he made some bad music, that it was his own peculiarity of mind. It felt so individual. Nobody else could do it. And I saw him in concert a few times. It was just, unbelievably inspirational and beautiful, including by happenstance just a few nights before he died. I saw him perform in Oakland with just a piano. He was doing this big tour, and it was just it was a huge stadium. I think a completely sold out crowd, and it felt so intimate and also still so strange that he was just such a mystery, and he was just pursuing his own delight. And I think that was really inspirational for me. And I had a very intense classical music upbringing growing up. I had a beautiful soprano voice, and I was in the San Francisco Boys Chorus. We sang a lot of opera. I took a lot of very serious piano lessons, and my parents were big classical music fans. I was hardly exposed to popular music from them at all. And so I think just in the 80s, when I was an adolescent, to have all this pop music come and collide with my own kind of stodgy musical upbringing produced something really exciting in me. And also, I mean, now when I get to perform music, usually with the magnetic fields, it's such a different experience from writing. It's so wordless. It's so kind of immediate in its delight. I'm not in charge of it. I'm just in the band. And I think all that's a great feeling. Yeah. I mean, I have tickets for Kamasi, Washington as soon as I get home to San Francisco. I can't wait.
So do you want to pursue music for the rest of your life as much as you want to pursue writing?
I mean, I'm not a very good musician. So if people let me up on stage to do a little music, I'm grateful. But I'm also very happy to sit in the back of the auditorium or in my own living room, listen to the musical efforts of other people. So in that way, I think I'll always be involved in music as a listener.
And how do you compare participating in the musical world with writing and with doing TV and movies?
It's just a different thing. I think, all writers, I think, listen to music because we have nothing to do all day long. And so there's this real attraction to an art form that goes beyond words in a way, that is speaking to some instinctual way. You put on, Sun Ra or John Coltrane, there's something that's going on there that you can't put into words. In fact, whenever anyone tries to put it into words, it sounds terrible. And I think to just have that part of my brain, the kind of non-wordy part of my brain get tickled is really an endless delight.
Well, reading your book, it made me want to pull out the Pet Shop Boys when you started talking about that. I had to pull that out.
Yeah, I mean, they were a whole other thing, right? They were like, they were just the secret code of being gay was what they were doing. And to grow up in San Francisco in the 80s, where that was, on one hand, completely visible in a kind of loud, social justice way, and also just kind of evident in neighborhoods, but then also still largely unspoken. Just to watch Pet Shop Boys kind of play with the invisibility of that was really exciting.
That's what Prince did as well. I mean, he played around in that whole with his sexuality.
Yeah,
as well.
I mean, in some ways they were doing the same thing. It's just totally different methodology. Pet Shop Boys hardly moved, and they were impeccably tailored. I mean, Prince was impeccably tailored, but in a kind of wild and crazy way. And I think they were a huge part of my life, and my son, to my delight, has become like the original Pet Shop Boys fan now. So he'll say to me sometimes, like, "Did you ever hear this 12-inch mix that they put out in 1987?" And I'm like, "Who are you? How are you talking to me?"
And then you said yes, and you pulled up the 12-inch.
And I say, "Of course I have." You can't teach your old man anything about Pet Shop Boys.
And back in my day.
Yeah.
Do you? Who would you want to meet?
That's a good voice. Yeah. You have that ready now.
Yeah, I have that. It was right there.
Yeah.
Who have you not had a chance to meet musically that you would like to meet?
You mean who's alive?
Yes.
Okay.
That's exactly what
I mean. Because it would be great to meet Shostakovich, but he's kind of long gone.
Yes.
I don't know. There's all kinds of musicians that I have had the pleasure of meeting, and you never know if meeting them is going to go well or not. And I had a really magical encounter many years ago with Leonard Cohen.
Oh, really?
That was pretty great. I met him at a thing, and then we were both in the same automobile going to this dinner, and our car was almost hit. And he said to me, "Just think, if we had died together, we would have been forever linked."
Well, hallelujah.
Yeah, wasn't that kind of a merit? But as someone pointed out to me, like, I would be the big bopper in that situation. It would be like Leonard Cohen and some other people
other guy.
Yeah.
Well, people who've read your books and have seen your movies and have watched your Netflix show would certainly disagree that you would have been the second fiddle in that particular scenario.
Well, that's sweet of them, but they're wrong.
Well, we'll leave that up for them. Daniel Handler, thank you very much for joining us
today. Thank you. This has been a delight.